Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is the Anarchist Experience. I'm your host, Robert Kruger. Today I have a guest here to join us. His name is Jake Thompson. He's an anarchist, communist, YouTuber, and activist. He runs a YouTube channel called Red and Black Revolutionary and various anarchist Facebook pages. Thank you for joining me today, Jake.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I understand that you are a red and black, and I am a red and yellow, and we obviously are going to have some things that are in disagreement. Did want to kind of do a quick pick in your head as far as a response that you might give to a person who comes from the perspective that we need a government, and when they say to you, "Look, we have governments, around the world. We've had them for ages and ages, last 2,000 years and so on. So show me an example of a anarchist society, that has had a large scale anarchist society that has ever worked or not devolved into some sort of chaos."
Well, I mean, in terms of stateless societies, the modern state has only been around for like maybe a few thousand years. It's not been a structure that's stood the test of time as many people think. It's not a structure that has existed, throughout the world's history. In fact, like for most of human history, we live without states. So it's definitely not something that's needed. The only reason it's in place right now is because we have entered an age where social stratification is the socioeconomic and political model. And like that's really the only reason it exists. It doesn't need to exist really at all. In terms of anarchist societies that have existed, well, I mean, we could just go like anarchism has been a recurring trend in human history. So, for example, there's been the anarchist territory in Ukraine, anarchist Spain, which spanned about like millions of people at least. So there's other different examples. There's one in Greece right now. There's a lot of anarchists over there, and there's this place where there technically is a government in place, but they simply won't allow the government to rule it. Or make any decisions. So basically, they're running the society themselves. And there's also Freetown Christiania, which is an anarchist society. There's anarchists. The Syrian conflict right now has anarchists in it that have established an anarchist territory. So it's not like it's something that hasn't ever been there. It's actually been there quite a bit. There was actually in China before Marxism-Leninism came around, there was anarchism, and anarchists actually influenced the Marxist-Leninist movement there. The Marxist-Leninists always like to put down anarchism, but when they talk about Mao and stuff, Mao is actually influenced by anarchists quite a bit. So it's kind of funny. But anyway, so it's not something that hasn't existed. It's existed a lot, and the modern nation-state structure, I mean, it hasn't existed for that long. It's been a fairly, like, people like to say, oh well, people voluntarily agreed to having these structures there and formed them up voluntarily, and that wasn't the case. As Noam Chomsky states, it's actually been a very violent process establishing these structures. So.
Well, I would definitely say that it's been a very violent process establishing these structures. In fact, as far as I understand it, history has shown that the institutions that we call government, at least as far as I understand it, were caused by invading tribes, basically creating a structure upon their subjugated victims as a government and establishing themselves that way.
Right.
So, all right. Well, in my response, I basically, would say that, does that mean that it's correct? Does that mean that it's valid to subjugate someone else according to your particular whims and, put a gun to their head and say, "Come on this way. You're going to give me your percentage of your money so that we can do my pet project," or whatever it is. And then, of course, they start going into, well, how can we have justice if we don't have a state? How do you have a trial? How do you have a understanding of what is law if you don't have a government?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do
Well,
about it?
I mean, like I like my personal response to, and yeah, there is definitely a moral argument from why states are kind of not good. But I guess my response to how we have law. I mean, law is not something that comes out of a state structure. It doesn't, at least it doesn't need to. Law is defined as rules that one would live their life by. So that could be established on a cooperative basis between people, and has been. Like the vast majority of tribes do it that way. I mean, they really don't have the same kind of command and obey structures that we do. They kind of have a more cooperative structure where people just kind of, okay, these are the rules we're going to live by, and these are the social norms. And that's what typically happens in the absence of hierarchical top-down structures. So it's not something that you would need to have law. It's actually kind of irrelevant, especially if you're talking about law in the context of, rules that we should liberalize by, because the state is good. Like, it has a propensity to disregard what should happen and do what's in its own interests of power, right? It attracts that corruption and creates that corruption. So I wouldn't say that you'd get anything moral out of that structure.
Definitely, and the other thing that I would like to bring to their attention when they bring that up is say, are you familiar with merchant law or common law? Have you ever done any reading on the history of law and where it came from? Because we had law in pretty much we had law everywhere, not just pretty much, factually everywhere prior to there being a government being
Right.
established.
Right.
Governments usurped the services of providing law in order to be able to have more power and influence over their societies. How is it possible for a king to claim that he has authority over his subjects if there's some court that can say, hey man, you promised to do this and you didn't, and the other guy gave you his stuff and you didn't
Right.
give him the stuff, so you're what's called committing fraud?
Right.
I'm the king. I get to do that kind of thing because we'll take over the law now.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, it's like, people talk about checks and balances within the system, but there really is no checks and balances when a certain group of people gets the veto power over society. That's why I always say that in order to have an actual system of checks and balance, you need to have interdependence and a cooperative basis. You can't be like, oh, we're going to monopolize control over you, and yeah, but you can have some checks and balances over us. Well, how are those checks and balances guaranteed if we don't have any recourse within the system?
Yeah. Well, you know what? When it comes down to it, this argument comes up all the time in anarcho-capitalist and anarcho-communist debates or discussion groups.
Right.
This particular point that I'd like to bring up. Anarcho-communists will say, well, you know what you really want is feudalism as an anarcho-capitalist, because when you create an anarcho-capitalist society, a person becomes the owner of a strict segment of land that they have homesteaded, or whatever it is that you want to call it, you little anarcho-capitalist pig, that they get to be the ruler over, and their rule goes. And it's a lovely little dig at anarcho-capitalists. And so the question then comes, isn't the same thing true when you accept personal property as a anarcho-communist? If you say that someone has personal property that they own and that they have the ability to create as their own, and that let's say that I end up somehow being in your house, and you come home and you're like, what the hell are you doing in my house? And I'm like, oh, I'm sleeping here. And you're
Right.
like, no, this is my house. Get the fuck out.
Right.
So how do you respond to my assertion that, well, any solution that you might provide in an anarcho-communist world regarding a trespasser, someone violating your personal property, would similarly apply to a person who is violating private property?
Right. Well, I wouldn't say, first of all, that anarcho-capitalists advocate feudalism. I think that's kind of, I mean, there tends to be a lot of, like, I don't know, animosity between the two groups, and they kind of, like, come at each other. Oh, well, you're a fascist. Oh, well, you're you're Stalin or whatever. So like I don't necessarily think anarcho-capitalists advocate feudalism, nor do I really think anarcho-capitalism would result in feudalism. I think it would result in the current trends that we see today. I don't take the view that it's going to be like this random dystopian, the monarch or control society or whatever. So I don't I don't take that point of view. I guess my response to what you said though would be the fact that there's a differentiation in anarcho-communist lines of thought between authoritarian force and anti-authoritarian force, right? So in the context of me having a toothbrush or something, like something I personally possess, keeping other people from using it would be, I guess, an anti-authoritarian force because it's establishing my rights of control over the toothbrush that I use, right? Now, in the context of private property, ANCOMs say that would be authoritarian force because what's happening there is there's a hierarchical structure set up of command and obey. So, for instance, if workers, are controlling or working in a factory, and I come along and I say, okay, well, I built this factory, so I have to, I get control over it. That means that I get control over all of the workers who use that factory, right?
Okay.
And so,
Couldn't you say similarly? I built this home, and therefore I have control over everyone that is a guest at my dinner party.
well, no, because that's different in the fact that you're personally using and occupying that home.
Okay, but
Same as the workers who live.
you act like as if a capitalist can't live, or he can't work in his own factory. He can't be a person who actually is a participant in the business that he has. I mean, is that really that big of a deal?
If he's using that factory just like the workers are, then yeah, he would have an equal say in, I guess, the collective decision making. But what
Okay, an equal say? I mean, let's just accept for the the premise that you said before, which was that he built this factory, okay? Because you said that he, in the example that you gave, that. So I'm going with that. Now, if he would like to amend it, we can certainly do so. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that you have somebody who, through his own labor or through by proxy labor, in other words, he did labor that was doing X, and then he traded it for Y, and that Y ended up being a factory. All right. So if that person actually produced by proxy the whole factory, it's all his labor. It's a result of his labor. Is that person going to have, for some reason, because he works there and he's got 16 other people who also work there, they all have the same equal ability to determine the use of his property?
Well, I mean, his is a loaded term there because, like, what happens when you start to say, "Oh, this belongs to that person," you need ethical justification behind it.
Okay, so yeah, it is a loaded term, but I guess the question then comes up: if he built it, even though other people are using it, why is it not his then?
Okay, well, that comes into the question of, so I guess the ANCOM response to that would be, okay, well, even though he built it, and even though, that may, give him some rights to it or whatever in the, I guess, ANCAP's conception, what he's doing by owning that thing that he built is he's alienating all of the other people that use that property from that property and from the labor that they're doing on that property and establishing his control over them as laborers on that property.
Well, that happens with personal property too, though. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I have a home. This is a home that I've built myself by proxy through my labors and trade. Now, this home has a couple of ovens because I'm Jewish and I happen to keep 2 ovens so that I can keep the cheese and the meat separate. Okay. Now, I happen to be really big on food, so I get big ovens, not just the small dingy ovens. I make a lot of meals that I really like to prepare, and it turns out that a neighbor of mine or some friends of mine, they like to make cookies for whatever particular events that they like to go to, and because of the size of the size and number of my ovens, they like to come over and use my ovens. Okay. Now, because it's my home, I have quote unquote dictatorial or hierarchical authority over the use of these ovens, even if I'm, part of the arrangement to work together to create these cookies. If I say to them, you know what, I don't really want to use my ovens to make these cookies anymore, get out, I still have that option. Okay, and if I say to them that, and then they say, wait, what can we do in order to get you to let us use your ovens because our ovens suck? And then I say, well, you know what, I really don't want to actually have to be, doing blah, 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 and so here's what I'd like. I'd like you to go ahead and make, 4 of the batches out of the 25 that you make, and just give them to me. I want them so that I can give them to my friends or whatever reasons.
Right.
Okay. So now I'm creating an authoritarian situation where I'm, threatening to deny them of the production. But it somehow is legitimate in one perspective and not in the other.
That would actually be considered illegitimate, because that's just because you're putting it in the context of an oven does not mean that the private property relations change. What you're describing is actually private property, and NCOMs would be against that example.
Even though it's in my own personal home.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, let me highlight that more. Even though you are in your personal home, that doesn't mean that the alienation that takes place when you monopolize control over the ovens and the hierarchical authoritarian control over the people that use those ovens when you establish your control over them, that doesn't mean that they go away just because it's in your home.
Okay, so the argument is then, if I'm taking a means of production and it is a tool that other people use, and I claim you can't use it unless I say so, this is creating the disconnect.
Well, yeah, I'd say so, yeah. I mean, that's how kind of the property norms, I guess, if you want to call them that, in anarcho-communist society operate. At least there are some ANCOMs that don't accept the usury example, but generally ANCOMs view the, I guess, property relations and private property illegitimate because, of who's using it and things like that.
I see. So, the amount of, whatever is produced, does that matter to the argument?
I don't see why it would.
Okay,
I don't see what bearing how much of the product is coming out of the means of production. I don't see that.
All right, so let's say, for example, if I use a device to produce rest, and I deny other people the option to use this device that I use to produce rest, my bed.
Well, that depends, though. So, I mean, means of production are categorized, first of all, by inputs into the economy. So when you're providing services for other people. So it would not really be categorized as a means of production, quote unquote, if you're talking about, oh, I'm going to go rest on my bed. Also, there's the thing of there have to be other people using it in order for it to be kind of.
I've got other people using my bed. I've got a girlfriend. She sleeps in it.
Right. Okay, so in that example, the ANCOM would say, hey, why don't both of you and your girlfriend control the bed equally because you both use it?
Right, and then I say, because I built the bed and it's my bed and it's in my house and I don't want her to sleep there anymore.
Okay, but then the ANCOM would counter that by saying, all right, but she has to sleep in that on a daily basis. She
doesn't. She's got another bed.
Oh, she's got another bed? All right. So take has to out of the equation then. If you're talking about so she still uses that bed, correct? She still occupies
that's
that
my
bed.
guess, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just let me explain, and then.
Okay. Go ahead. Absolutely.
So I mean, if you're talking about in the context of a guest, all right, then that wouldn't necessarily be the case, because what happens is you're still using that bed as you yourself are still occupying and using that bed. Right?
Okay.
It's not like, he's staying there on a daily basis and occupying and using that bed as well. So that's the kind of thing. So I mean, lending my property to someone else would not necessarily qualify, because you're still using that property as a means to an end. Whereas that other person isn't necessarily, they're just borrowing it.
Great.
But then when it becomes like a factory where workers like use that on a daily basis and they're using it as a means to an end as well, like they're occupying and using that, then that becomes unethical because you're alienating from them from their labor and
Right.
the things that they.
I got you. I got you. All right. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to break it down into where the fundamental breaking point, where the line is, where it's like, all right, it goes from this to that. And so I'm
Right.
going to try to go through some examples of where I find personal property being clearly understood and accepted by an NCOM, and then where it then switches over to becoming private property in the NCOM position.
Mm.
All right, so let's say, for example, I have um, a a bike
Right.
or a car. I
Right.
mean, either one of these could be personal property. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and I've got the car, and I drive it around, and I offer to give people rides to places based, in trade for currency.
Right.
Now, assuming that we were in your ANCOM world, would there be currency?
No.
Okay, so in exchange for some sort of IOU, like you're going to do me a
Well,
favor.
I mean, the economic system of distribution in an ANCOM, I guess, society would be a system of distribution of from each according to ability to each according to need. So what would happen is that people would get together in their communities and say, okay, what do we need and how can we reproduce it? And so you'd basically collectively organize it that way. It wouldn't necessarily be a system of, or it wouldn't be a system of, oh, well, I'm not going to give you this unless you give this to me. Like exchange is an economic form of distribution. I mean, yeah, sure, people could, in individual cases of people trading like one or two things, that wouldn't necessarily be, that could happen, but as a broad mode of economic distribution, there would be from each according to ability to each according to need, not necessarily, or not exchange.
Right. Well, let's move past the need thing, because I understand that we're going to get to a structural violence argument at some point, and we'll address that, I think, at that point.
All right.
So let's just deal with wants, okay? So we're in a society. There happens to be no currency used for some reason. I don't understand why, but for some reason people from the ANCOM perspective don't like the idea of a tool that facilitates exchange and reduces scarcity. But let's say that I happen to have a membership with Lyft or something like that,
Right.
where I happen to offer my services as a taxi to people who are in the vicinity that I'm at. They pull up their app on their phone and they say, all right, I need a ride from someplace to someplace, and I have an agreement with each person that gets into my vehicle, and I say, I'll give you a ride from here to there if you'll buy me a 6-pack of beer, or if you'll give me, whatever. Beer's probably a bad example since you don't want to be drinking and driving.
Right.
But there's this assumed, well, I'll give you a ride somewhere. Will you give me a dinner? Will you give me a blah blah blah, whatever.
Right.
In exchange, and so it's kind of like a a barter type of an exchange that occurs. Okay, so I'm doing this in my car, and then there's this friend of mine who they also have a car, but they don't want to have the wear and tear on their car that is caused by doing such a process. Okay, and they asked me, can I use your car to provide those services, because I have some things that I'd like to, exchange for and whatever. For some reason, it's a beneficial thing for them to take my car and use it as a means to generate things that they're interested in and that they want. Right. And I say, that's fine, but you're going to have to compensate me for the wear and tear on my vehicle, plus just the inconvenience of having to, the worry that I'm thinking about my car being harmed in some fashion. And so I make a trade with them that says, all right, I get, a certain percentage of whatever it is you get. This has now turned it into a hierarchical situation where I can say to them, no, you can't use my car anymore. Hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it would be, and that's why I wouldn't justify that ethically.
I see. Even though they're perfectly fine with the idea that I can exclude them at any time when they're not using it. Once I let them start using it, it's now not allowed.
Well, I mean, in the context of things being allowed, ANCAPs talk about that a lot. You say, "Oh, well, we're gonna, you're gonna force me to do this and that." I mean, you wouldn't be necessarily forced to do anything. I mean, you wouldn't be. I mean, an anarchist system, or at least anarchist in my conception, maybe you have a different definition of anarchism as I do. I know you do. So, but uh, and just like let's say an anarcho-communist system, right? Anarcho-communism is based on free association, so people would be able to enter into the economic modes of organization that they felt like. So, I mean, nothing's not allowed. What I'm just saying is that it's not ethically justified if you're, basically alienating someone else from stuff that they use as well.
I see. Um, I mean, realistically, that happens all the time, though. I mean, people choose to alienate people from things that they use even in the personal
Yes,
property
but
realm.
state violence also happens all the time.
Oh,
So,
okay, I mean, legitimately happens all the time. Let me give you an example. Like, I have a girl moves in with me into my apartment here, and then I say to her, you know what, the things aren't working out. I need you to get out.
mhm.
I mean, isn't that me alienating her from something that she's using?
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I'm like, I don't agree with that kind of convention. I mean, I think that's going to have to depend severely on the situation. So, I mean, if she's like threatening to murder you or some shit, then she's alienating you. So then that means that you kicking her out would be re-establishing your
No, just say
unalien.
that she's being a bitch to me. That's all.
Just being a bitch.
Yeah.
So, but like, okay, so if she's not willing to stop being a bitch, right, and she's not real, and she's not willing to, stop harassing you or whatever, isn't she then alienating you from your control over the apartment or whatever, and establishing hierarchical control over you, and thus kicking her out would be reestablishing the kind of non-hierarchy that you have there?
Oh, okay. So if I had a building that has a bunch of machines in it, and some people are saying, well, we're going to sabotage the machines because we don't like the way things are going in whatever fashion, and
Uh-huh.
then I kick them out. That's somehow different.
I mean, I think depending on the situation. So if you're talking about, oh, we're going to sabotage the machines because, we don't like you and that's, fuck you or whatever, I think that would be them establishing hierarchical control over you, and that's why it'd be different. But if you're talking about you're basically like, I don't know, you're locking them in the cellar or some shit, and they sabotage the machines as a way
Oh
to
yeah, yeah.
stop, that's would be, so it depends on the situation.
Oh sure, sure. I get what you're saying. So let's say that in the case of a person who I don't know. Let's say you've got a person who has labored a very long time. They're probably 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone through the process of making tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
They've raised tomatoes. They also grew a bunch of other things that they used to survive in whatever. But they canned or bottled or whatever, pickled
Mm-hmm.
tomatoes. And
Right.
so they've got all these bottles of tomatoes, and that's their labor, and they also have a little shack that they have where they sell these tomatoes out of.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out that they they find that working the shack puts them in a situation where they're not so comfortable with dealing with people. They're just not a people person. They don't like the small talk that happens, and so they ask a person, hey, would you like to share in the profits of selling my tomatoes?
Mm-hmm.
And the person says, oh sure, sure, I'll sell your tomatoes for you. What portion do I get? And I say, it's going to be about 20% of whatever the tomatoes sell for.
Mm-hmm.
That would be potentially legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
But then if I say to them, well, you know what, it's just not working out, I want to hire somebody else to do that, that would be me establishing an alienation towards this person.
What do you mean? Like, so you're talking about like the differences between if you hired them on as an equal and gave them equal control of the profits and what goes on, or are you talking about if you hired them like as your employee?
I'm talking about making, I guess it would be an employer-employee relationship. That they don't have the tomatoes. I have the tomatoes. I made the bottles of tomatoes, and I made the shack. So I'm saying if you want to be here and sell tomatoes that I made, I'll give you some of the proceeds. And if you don't want to do that, then don't. Then when they start doing it and they in some way do things that I don't, in a way that I don't approve of, I
Mhm.
say to them, well, no, this is not going to work out. I'm going to have to, you're going to have to find something else to do.
Mhm.
This
Okay.
somehow it
So,
becomes me
so,
alienating them from the
so,
production.
so let's go down this road then.
Okay.
ANCAPs are against involuntary action, correct?
Yes.
So they're against coercion and saying, okay, you have to do this for me because I am the boss or whatever.
Well, we're against, let's say, for example, if I were to go to somebody and, I don't know, kidnap their kid and say, you're going to do X, Y, or Z, and if you don't, then I'm going to harm your child.
Okay.
This would be an obvious, breach.
Right. So,
So,
so if we're kicking that back to the boss worker example, how is
uh,
that different besides extreme? I'm like it's different. Obviously, it's not as extreme if you're gonna go kidnap someone's kid or like tell somebody work for me or get out. Obviously, that's not as extreme. But how is that different relationship wise? If you're saying, okay, either you do this for me the way I want it to, or the way I want you to, or consequence X.
um, well, I mean, if you say, if you'd like to be my boyfriend slash girlfriend, whatever relationship there is, I would like to have you be that. But if you start acting like a jerk, then I'm gonna opt out of this situation. I'm not going to be part of this situation. I don't think that that's a initiation of violence in any or coercion.
I wouldn't think that it is either because by acting like a jerk, you're controlling someone else. You're establishing authoritarian relationships there as well.
Well, I mean, maybe not even acting like a jerk, just saying, you know what, I'd like to have you in a relationship, and if you're going to eat meat, I'm just going to have to,
I wouldn't say that's illegitimate. I mean, that's basically saying, all right, well, you can only be romantically involved with me if you do what I want you to do. I mean, that's clearly authoritarian. I wouldn't justify that.
I see. So you would say that a vegetarian would be, exhibiting authoritarian behavior if they refused a romantic interest because the other person would not give up meat.
No, I wouldn't say that. Not to give out meat. What I'm saying is that if you
Give up?
establish a relationship where you give up meat, okay, yeah, then I say yeah.
Yeah, you said out, but anyway, keep going.
Yeah, no, I misheard what you said actually.
Okay. So
Yeah. So what like I would say yeah, if you're saying okay, you can only be in a relationship with me on the condition that you give up meat, and that's being authoritarian.
I see. And so these types of relationships you would say are coercive?
I would say yeah. I mean, what else are we going to describe a relationship where it's do what I want or get out basically?
Huh. Well, that's a bit of a stretch for me. I just don't find it to be coercion. I find it to be a choice that is, someone is making to, who they're going to associate with.
Coercion, you're talking about rights of control over something else, right? So that's coercion. An agent having rights of control over another agent, correct?
Well, I mean, there's other options that exist. I mean, it's not like, it's
Yeah,
not
but
control in that.
coercion definition-wise is marked by agent or is marked by rights of control an agent has over another agent. Is it not?
Coercion is a fairly difficult term to describe in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's it is a means. It is a method of coercion in a certain respect. I mean, it just depends on what your definition is. And to me, there's, let's say, for example, a parent that says, if you don't clean your room, you don't get any dinner. Um,
That's clearly coercion to me.
yeah, to me that is a sign of coercion.
Hmm.
Um, but for some, it might not be. It might not be coercion. It to me, it's pretty clear that that would be coercion. A person who says, "Hey, you know, if we're going to, if I'm going to drive the car to such and such place, um, we're going to listen to the music that I want to listen to,
Hmm.
and you have the option of just not going on the trip." I wouldn't necessarily say that that's
So
coercion.
you wouldn't say forcing somebody to listen to your music the whole trip is not coercion?
I would say that it's kind of jerkish, but I wouldn't. No,
Why
I
would
wouldn't say that
that
it's
not be
coercion.
coercion? I mean, if coercion is defined as controlling another person, you're obviously
Right,
controlling
but they
someone.
have the option to not go.
They have the option, but in the with regards, and this is, I guess, the problem I have with, I guess, most ANCAP analysis when it comes to that, is they're only viewing things in the context of how you enter into the relationship. They're not viewing things in the context of what the relationship is like once you're in that relationship.
Oh,
So
I see.
just because I've entered into the relationship voluntarily does not mean that the person cannot control me from the top down once I am in the relationship.
I see. All right, and so I guess the question then comes if there are other options for the person that is quote unquote being coerced, which are perfectly legitimate options, but they choose to be in the one that
I
they
mean,
are
there,
coerced.
but also, I mean, if you're marking coercion as like, you don't have any other option, isn't there an option in the, say, the situation where the state says, "Give me your money, or I'm going to lock you up"? I mean, there's definitely an option there. There's options. I mean, you
Right,
could say,
right.
"All right, I'm
But
going to give you
I said
money."
legitimate. I said legitimate option. I'm not saying an
Legitimate
option.
would have to that would require an ethical justification, right? So we can't just say, "Oh, this is legitimate and expect it to be fact." We need to give
Right.
the ethical
We have to
claim.
find out what is another legitimate option. So let's say
Hold on, hold on. I'll be right back.
okay. All right. Well, apologize for the interruption. So certainly we're going to get back
All
to.
right, I'm back. Sorry,
Okay,
I just
we're back. All right, great. Okay, so just so everybody knows, though, I am keeping track of what is going on in the comments section on YouTube. So if you are watching live, certainly, if you have a comment, post it, and I'll be happy to, interject it if it is appropriate to the conversation.
right. I mean, I think we should give the viewers a bit of a participation in this. I think that would be interesting. So, I mean, if you see a comment that you think would be worth interjecting, certainly do.
Absolutely. So, all right. Um, well, the thing is that I'm finding that your response to the um, coercion of a romantic relationship where a person says, you know, I'm now a vegetarian, and if you want to keep a relationship with me, you're going to have to give up meat too.
Hmm.
You're saying that that's coercive.
I think it would be.
Yeah. Um, but so you wouldn't respect anybody's choice to do that,
What do you mean respect?
or you wouldn't. I mean, all right. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you've got a couple. They get together. They're having a great relationship. They really like each other. They're spending time with each other. They're whatever. Okay, and the guy, he ends up getting converted into an atheist or a Christian or a
Hmm.
whatever, and the girl still is stuck in whatever religion or lack of religion that they were in before the relationship started. And he says,
Right.
"Look, you know what? I really like you. I really, really like you, but
Mhm.
I just can't handle being with you. As if you're going to continue to believe in this thing I disagree with, because I've come to a new understanding. And so now that he's a religious person and doesn't respect her
Mhm.
atheism
Mhm.
or vice versa, then you're saying that that's coercive for him to say I don't want to be in this relationship anymore."
Well, I mean, I think that there has to be further context given there for the justification that it is coercive. So we can't just look at the fact that he's saying, "Okay, I don't want to be in a relationship with you anymore." You have to look at the fact that he's saying, "You do what I say, or there's no more relationship."
Okay, so all right, so then if the person says, "Hey, you know what? This isn't working out. I'm just going to go ahead and move on." That's fine. And then the person says, "Hey, what can I do so that we can keep this relationship going?" And the person says, "Well, you could convert." Then it's not coercion?
No, that would be coercion. I mean, I'm saying that hierarchical structures of command and obey, that's coercion. And that's still a coercion if you're saying, all right, well, if you don't convert, the relationship is over.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether the person agrees to the terms or not. It's still coercive because there's still a hierarchical structure of command and obey there.
Okay, so if I say, all right, you know what, I'm opting out of the relationship, we're fine with that. That's
Yeah,
not. What's
yeah.
that? Okay, so that's not coercive. And then for the person to ask the question, well, is there anything that I can do to keep the relationship going? That's not coercion.
I wouldn't say so.
But then the person
But there's
responds
there's
saying,
a factor though. There's a factor of it depends on what kind of I don't know, like the kind of conditions you're leaving the relationship on. So if you're leaving the relationship on the condition that I don't feel like being with this person anymore, I'd say that's your right to do so because you're choosing what kind of relationships that you're in. But if you're saying that oh well you can't be in this relationship with me if you don't do X, you know, then I think that is coercion because what you're saying is you're modifying the nature of the relationships that other people can have. You're saying, all right, well, this relationship is going to go the way I want it to, or else, fuck you, get the fuck out.
right, right. Okay, so Autonomous Prime commented saying coercion. The intimidation of a victim to compel the individual to some act or against his or her will by the use of psychological pressure, physical force, or threats. Do you
I would
think
agree with that.
you
I
would
agree
agree?
with that definition.
All right, so you would say that it's psychological pressure type coercion in the case of the boyfriend saying, if you don't become an atheist, then we're done.
Yeah.
I see. Hmm. All right, so then you're fine with me just ending the relationship. You're fine with me with the other person asking the question whether, what can I do? That's still not coercion. But as soon as I tell them what it is that I want, that's coercion.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess in some sense that's what I'm saying.
Wow, that's a pretty broad definition of the term coercion. Um,
I mean, plenty of words have broad definitions, so.
okay, so let me ask if you had an anarcho-communist society,
Uh,
and I'm part of this anarcho-communist society,
uh,
and I come over and I get the food or whatever it happens to be, and then I go back home and I play my video games,
uh,
and I continue to do this, and I'm not actually working on anything. I'm just you know
uh,
goofing off playing video games all the time.
uh.
Um, how do you get me to actually participate in the benefit of the society? Or do you just accept it and just say, all right, well, we've got some leech here?
That doesn't sound like something. At least coming from the anti-authoritarian viewpoint that I come from, that doesn't sound like something that I'd support. Because what happens then is you're basically making all the other people in the relationship in the society your slave. So basically, you contribute to what I want to do. Give me my pizza and my video games, and I'm not going to give anything back. You're just going to be my slaves. I mean, that sounds pretty authoritarian to me.
I see. So if I take the fruits of someone else's labor without giving them something in return, then that would be slavery.
Definitely.
Okay. Um, what if it's not what they want?
What do you mean?
Well, let's say that yeah, okay, guys, I get what you're saying. I'm playing the video games thing is just not it's not producing something that really is benefiting the society. So what I'll do is I'll actually stream them on Twitch, and I'll provide entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody really cares about his Twitch channel and doesn't really want to watch him play video games.
Then you're not contributing back. You're still doing something that's completely worthless. So you're still basically making other people, your slaves, taking the fruits of their labor and not giving anything back. I mean, because
Sure.
obviously you don't want the Twitch, so you're still not giving anything back, and that's still authoritarian, I guess, by the rules, I guess, that I have established for authoritarianism.
Okay, so um, if the person similarly makes mud pies nobody wants, this is not contributing. The person does, I don't know, makes paintings that nobody finds aesthetically pleasing.
Mm.
This is still a slavery type of situation that they're using other people as their slaves.
If those people are contributing to them and they're not contributing to those people, I would say so. Yeah.
But their claim is, no, look, I'm contributing. I'm making all these paintings, and you're welcome to have them.
Obviously, if they're useless to those people, they're not contributing.
Okay, so then as far as determining the amount of use, let's say that I'm taking, I don't know, let's say 100 usefulnesses or utils
Right.
from the on a daily basis, and I'm contributing 40 utils to this usefulness of it, then I'm creating a 60 utils worth of slavery.
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like from each according to his means to each according to his need. I mean...
Well, I mean, I think in the context, so for example, if you're talking about like, okay, well, you're forcing that person to contribute and they don't want to contribute, aren't you, kind of compromising their needs or whatever? But that's if you look at it conversely, other people have a need for that contribution. So if you're not letting that person, if you're not saying, okay, well, you have to contribute, then you're coming into contact with the needs of other people. And so that's actually
let me give you an example so that we can clearly see the slavery thing, for the 100 versus the 40. All right, so you've got a person who is a disabled person. They have fairly limited motion and so on. They produce 40 utils worth of value in a day, and like everybody else, they're using 100 utils of stuff per day. So they're, in a sense, slavery, creating a 60 util amount of slavery for the rest of everyone. And this is somehow, an understanding that I'm getting from what you're saying. But as far as I understand the end composition, that this is not, I'm somehow wrong there. I mean, it doesn't. There's a disjoint there.
I don't think if you look into ANCOM theory, you would find that that's wrong.
Okay, so then at this point, it's
if there's ANCOMs out there sitting there and saying, all right, well, we're just going to let people succubus off society. That's not in, kind of accordance with ANCOM principles at all, I don't think.
Okay, and Kenji asks, or says, without a price system, you cannot calculate the net loss of a relatively valueless production.
Oh, that's a great subject. That's a great subject within the confines of these discussions. So, are you talking about the calculation problem? The idea that you can't calculate, you can't economically calculate prices without prices?
Well, the thing is that when we're talking about price, I think that a lot of times people make a mistake of explaining what it is that you can calculate and what you can't calculate. Now, you can certainly calculate the empirical values of, let's say, conductivity of electricity or heat. That something does conduct heat in a very efficient manner. You can calculate that, and you can see that, all right, well, in relation to the amount of copper that we have, for example, on the planet, and the amount of ceramic that we can make on the planet, and both of which may be able to transmit electricity because of technologies and so on. We can figure out that because the non-copper example is very efficient and actually is in high amount of we can create it pretty much on a whim. That the use of copper in this particular example is kind of like a waste of resources, because we can quickly and cheaply use ceramic to do the same thing. I think it's ceramic. It's a ceramic with some alloy in it or something like that. I don't know exactly all the things about how ceramic is used in electricity, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Right.
Or let's say fiber optic cable versus copper for telephone lines, right? I mean, we know that we can create telephone lines using fiber optic cable, and it is cheap as dirt to create fiber optics. as far as like the amount, because it's sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus copper, which is a refined
Mm-hmm.
and somewhat scarce metal.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you can actually clearly determine um, the value of, let's say, which material to use. But then when it comes to how those particular materials are used based upon what it is that people want,
Mm-hmm.
what it is that people subjectively value, is
Mm-hmm.
where I think that the break comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, an engineer can very quickly say to you, well, the optimal solution is to use this material, and this material
Mm-hmm.
in order to make a circuit board.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you seeing the distinction between the two, and why it is that people say that the calculation problem is a problem for an anarcho-communist society?
I understand the argument, and I've heard the argument before, but I don't think that it's a legitimate criticism. And here's why. If you're saying that, we need prices to, objectively quantify what people want, then I think that that's ignoring a basic fact. I think it's ignoring the basic fact that even in a gift economy where things are distributed from ability and according to need, there's still economic action being taken place and economic allocation being taken place. And that's what, the ANCAPs are saying is needed to quantify what people want and thus to make economic calculation possible. So if economic action, thus what is needed to quantify what the ANCAPs are saying needs to be quantified, is still going on, then I don't see what the problem is.
Okay, so economic action through the gift economy is still happening. Like you've got somebody who's hungry, and so then you give him food.
Right.
Right, we can clearly see that hunger is one of the things that he demands. Turns out, though, I mean, let's say, for example, the person is hungry,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really demanding to be left alone because they're trying to go through some sort of emotional and spiritual journey by ostracizing themselves, isolating themselves, and not consuming food for a period of time, doing some sort of fast. So unless you ask them, obviously you've got a disconnect. But then the question is, what type of food that they want. We can figure out. Well, hey, you know what, this person wants steak. Let's say,
Mm-hmm.
for example. So then we give them some beef, all right, and that's great. And they say, no, I want filet mignon. And so, all
Mm-hmm.
right, so we give them filet mignon. All right, so we've calculated that they want filet mignon, so we give them filet mignon. So then the question comes up, well, what happens to all the carcasses of the cows that you're slaughtering so that you can provide filet mignon to everybody who wants it? And then there are
Mm-hmm.
some people who do want to have, I don't know, bone marrow and heart and kidney and so on, but they're really not very many in comparison to the number that want filet mignon.
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't that end up with all this extra stuff that nobody wants, or that they wouldn't prefer?
Okay, but like, so if you're coming from the context of, okay, well, an anarcho-communist society would be based on meeting people's needs, as we already established. If people have a need to not have a bunch of dead cow carcasses lying around, that would come into conflict with the principle, just killing off cows and then throwing them around everywhere or whatever. So like, I think that in a society where you're meeting people's needs proper, you're going to have to compromise to say, okay, well, we're going to meet people's needs as best as we can. You can't just say, okay, well, we're going to give this person an obnoxious amount of their needs satisfied and disregard everybody else, because that goes against the principle of from each according to their ability to each according to their need, because the other person isn't having their needs satisfied.
Oh well, I'm not necessarily even discounting the idea that you could dispose of the carcasses in some fashion without having it being in a problem. But the problem is that then you've got all this waste. What happens in an anarcho-capitalist society is that the high demand items, or the high value items, the ones that people really, really want in comparison with the ones that people are like, I'd settle for it. The people who are settling for the hamburger, for
Mm-hmm.
example, are in essence paid to accept a lower cut of meat.
Okay, but I'm not sure like what's so if you're talking about like in the context of anarcho-communist society, I don't see why it couldn't be compromised so that okay, we're going to take the less amount of things so that we don't make a gradation on the environment and
Oh, let's not go into the environmental thing. I mean, let's just assume that
well,
there's
you're
no
talking about
environment.
waste, so I assumed that was going to be an environmental problem, but whatever. So you're talking about okay, well, if if you're meeting people's needs like that, there's going to be a lot of waste. Well, I don't see why people couldn't compromise and say, okay, we're not going to move for that much of waste being created, and so our needs are actually going to quantify the less amount of waste being created possible.
Okay, so even though people as individuals have all chosen, hey, you know what, I really want filet mignon. I like filet mignon. And then the consensus is that, you know what, we we end up having all this waste of the cow if we all have filet mignon, so let's probably try to do something a little more efficient here. So then the, there's this debate as to who gets the filet and who has to eat the kidney.
I don't see why that would be. I think that in the context of a society based on meeting people's needs as best as possible, I don't see why conflict over resources would arise.
Well, okay, let me put it this way. If there is a scarce or rivalrous thing,
Mm-hmm.
you and I will disagree.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be a disagreement.
Well, sure, there's going to be disagreement, but the level of compromise that people are willing to do is going to vary between the systems that they're in. So if
Oh,
you're
sure,
talking
sure.
about
Right,
in
and
the,
in order to resolve the disagreement, in our case, we compensate those people who are willing to go with a less desirable, um,
well, that's
thing.
actually something I wanted to get into because the level of compromise, again, like as I said, it's going to depend on the system as you agreed to. And that takes the form of kind of systems effect on people. So if you're talking about a system of social stratification in which the idea, the game strategy of the system, how you get ahead, is getting as much for yourself as possible, like within the confines of a capitalist social order. That's
Okay,
going
I'm going to ask you to rephrase that because I don't want to misunderstand what you're saying, if you would please.
to.
Could you repeat that in different language?
Okay. So if you're talking about like how systems, like social, political, and economic systems affect people, that's going to vary on how what you call stratification, how equitable that system is, how basically how you get ahead in that system. You understand?
Okay, so yeah, in the const, in my understanding, we're part of nature. We
Mhm.
are designed by the evolutionary process to
Uh,
be in a fashion interested in the survival of the species and also our
right,
lineage. So we're going to be pleasure seekers. We're also going to be trying to find something that is most efficient for ourselves and things like that. So yeah, if somebody is in a
yes, but the amount of the kind of behavior that people are willing to do to get to that end is going to be different depending on the social system.
right, right, and so the claim is that in an anarcho-capitalist system, it's what?
Okay, so I guess in the confines of any capitalist social order, anarcho-capitalist, whatever, what have you, in the confines of a capitalist social order based on inequity, so where people have more than others, that means that how you get ahead in that social system is going to be getting as much for yourself as possible. That's what's encouraged by the social system, and if that's what you have encouraged by the social system, that means that people are going to act within their self-interest as much as possible. So doing things like, trying to monopolize rivalrous resources for themselves. Doing things like saying, all right, well, I want this much, so fuck you, I'll get mine. And, you have fun getting yours. And in the confines of, let me finish. I do want to get this out.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
in the confines of an equitable system based on shared power and mutual aid working for mutual benefit, that's going to be different because how you get ahead is working for mutual benefit. So people are going to be much more inclined to compromise for the needs of each other and others than just kind of mindlessly consuming everything away. So I guess that's the answer I would give you.
Okay, so when I say the anarcho-communist position would lead a person to become a moocher, so to speak, or to do the minimum necessary in order to not get the viewing eyes that are going to criticize him for
Mm-hmm.
um, you know being a leech.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not innate to that type of a system?
What do you mean? So you're asking me if being a leech is innate to communist modes of organization?
In an anarcho-communist, the way that I understand it, yeah. I mean, isn't it, you know, wouldn't you say that?
But in the context of an anarcho-communist society, you have a social system
Right.
where the way you get ahead is by working for mutual benefit. And as I just said, the way people behave in social systems is going to be categorized by how you get ahead in those social systems.
Okay,
So
how does somebody get ahead in a society where pretty much everybody's considered equal?
get ahead is the term get ahead. The way context I'm using it is the term. Uh, well, I mean, so there has to be this considered though. So if you're talking about in a communist society, right?
Right.
Equality is basically equality of opportunity. Equality is not meant to say equality of outcome. So it's not meant to say people are going to get this exact amount, this same exact amount of everything. It's just equal opportunity for everybody to get what they want, right? That's
Okay.
what communist conceptions of of equality are. It's not kind of this, everybody has the same amount of everything and everybody
So,
stays at the same level possible.
so if I were to prove to you that it is not equality of opportunity, does that do anything? I
What do you
mean, if
mean?
I were actually to prove that to you that it's not equal opportunity,
That communism is not equal opportunity?
yeah.
Um, I guess that would have to make me change my worldview a bit, but you would have
Okay.
to prove that to me first.
Okay. Well, there are people who are born with physical deformities.
Right.
They don't have the equal opportunity of the people who possess no physical deformities.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be able to attract a spouse or a mate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's say that they were born with a penchant for being kind of brazen, or that their over analytical nature tended to be off-putting to the people of the opposite gender.
Mm-hmm.
So finding a girlfriend, became prohibitive. In the anarcho-capitalist society, this person could use his other talents in order to create um, a, a large amount of wealth, and in so doing impress someone who finds that particular thing of interest, and then attract a mate. The same thing with a person who's got a physical deformity. The anarcho-communist society prohibits him from, these people from doing so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but if you're talking about creating massive quantities of wealth for oneself, that means
Uh,
that you're depriving other people of
no, no,
that.
no, no.
Not,
This is
that's not
common
equality of
fallacy. This is a common fallacy. Um,
opportunity. All right.
okay,
So,
there's okay. Is there a fixed amount of wealth in a society?
okay. I would say yeah, there is.
There's not.
I mean, maybe fixed in the sense of how much we can make. Sure, that could be, I guess, infinite, but not really because we live in a finite world and wealth is based on material things that exist in reality. So yeah, actually, I would say that that's limited.
Actually, wealth isn't necessarily fixed on things that are, actual physical things that exist in reality necessarily. There are people who have actually sold um, World of Warcraft funds for things that are in reality, but those things aren't.
What do you
They're
mean?
made
I
up
mean
numbers.
the ways by which we play World of Warcraft. So the internet servers, the
Right, but
computer.
the internet server doesn't change what, the number.
Yeah, but I'm saying that exists in reality.
Yeah, 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 I
That's
understand it, but
fiction.
let me clarify this, because, all right, the number that exists on my account in World of Warcraft that indicates the amount of gold that I have can be 0 or it can be 5 billion.
Okay.
It still takes up the same allocation in the memory server. Okay?
Okay.
Actually, unless you use floating points, but in general, there's no difference between having something that says 1 billion and
Okay.
something that says 9,999,999,900,000,
Right.
so you know,
Okay.
so the amount of bits that are required does not change, but it is more wealth,
Mhm.
and it's
Yeah, but
fantastical.
the things in which we deliver that into our reality exist in reality, do they not? The
Oh, they
computers.
do, they do,
Yeah,
but
so
you have
that's
more
based
wealth.
on things. That's based on things that exist in reality. Without things that exist that don't
I get
exist
what you're
in
saying.
reality.
I get what you're saying. But what I'm saying to you is this: that a person can have in the World of Warcraft
Hmm.
almost 10 times the same amount of wealth
Okay.
if you change some digits that
Okay.
take up the same amount of same amount of physical resources.
So are you trying to say that's comparable to wealth, how it works in our reality?
No, I'm saying that it is not necessarily a truism that wealth is you know limited based upon physical constraints. That in the future, as we continue to move forward, that we will find that
I'm
the
saying
creation
reality
of
right now. I'm talking about reality right now. That
right.
is limited to physical constraints.
Well, I gave you an example from right now.
But that's again that's limited to the tools that we use to bring that wealth into our reality. So the computers, the servers that we have all that on, that exists within reality. That doesn't just
Yes,
magically
those
pop out
computers
of it.
exist within our reality. It doesn't change the fact that there is more when the number is 99999 than if the number is 100000000.
I'm not contesting that. I'm simply saying that for that to exist, there have to be things in reality that facilitate its existence.
Oh, well, yeah, yeah. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying though is that there can
So
be more wealth.
I'm saying that because there has to be things in reality that facilitate its existence, and there's a limited amount of things in reality,
Mhm.
there is a limited amount of wealth that can be created.
I disagree, but it's kind of a minute point. I mean, in essence, we are living in a very, very like a tiny, tiny, tiny speck. We're like a subatomic particles worth of the universe when it comes to that type of thing. I mean, for all intents and
Yeah, totally.
purposes.
Totally, I accept that point, but
Yeah.
I don't like that's still. I mean, we still live in a limited reality, at least with the given the
Yeah, but for
term.
all intents and purposes, for us, it's in essence infinite.
Well, in essence, compared to like what we know as our reality, but in the like literal terms of infinite, nothing is infinite. At least with the current level of technology that we have. So in reality, right now, there is a limited amount of wealth that we can create, and we don't even like for instance, we don't even if we grant your point, we don't even have the technology to go and explore all those other galaxies. So right
Right.
now, things are limited.
Oh yeah, temporarily, sure, sure.
Yeah, that's
All
all I'm
right.
saying.
So let's double check here. Yeah, let's see. Nope, nope, nothing there. Uh, Benjamin Wenham suggests that Eve might be a better, um, you know, concept to use for the analogy, but I don't know anything about Eve, so I couldn't say. All
Right.
right. So, in any case, um, the question then comes up again, just to clarify for us, the amount of wealth that exists is not limited, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the amount of wealth that can be created, sorry, is
Okay.
not limited as for all intents and purposes. Not that it couldn't be theoretically if we reached the boundaries of the universe, or that it couldn't be theoretically if we reached the maximum capacity sustainable for the current, available place where we're at.
Uh-huh.
Um, but the idea that there's a fixed amount that if somebody becomes more wealthy, that it somehow prevents other people from becoming wealthy
Mm-hmm.
is a fallacious one. That when
I've
I
heard that point. I've heard that point.
right,
When talking to ANCAPs or just right wingers in general, they'll tell me, "Oh well, wealth isn't relative. So by having lots of wealth, I'm not depriving anybody else of anything." But the thing is,
yeah,
wealth in society
yeah,
is material and based off of material things.
yeah.
So, for instance, I cannot create wealth unless I have human labor to create that wealth.
Oh,
And
that's
what
not true.
happens is,
That's
yeah,
not true.
yeah, it is. I mean,
That's
like,
fine.
so, for example, I can't just,
Actually, you know what? What you said specifically is true. Let me correct that. You said I can't create wealth without human labor. The fact that you said I is it's a self-confirming statement. It's self-affirming. If you are a human, and so if you create wealth,
mhm.
now I would say wealth can be created without a human being required, or human labor being required, or even the proceeds of human labor becoming capable of producing wealth being required.
Mhm. Okay,
I'll
so
give you
then
an example.
what? Okay, sure.
So we're living out in some plains area. We are, hunter-gatherer society. We're, traveling the plains.
Mhm.
There is a spring that is feeding water into a stagnant pool,
Mhm.
creating water that is not potable.
Mhm.
You cannot drink this water; it will make you sick. You'll die.
Uh,
Earthquake happens.
uh,
Now the spring is up here, and
uh,
now there's a cliff over here. It falls, and now we have potable water.
uh,
Wealth has been created.
uh.
We are more
Well,
wealthy than we were
yeah,
before.
yeah, but in the context of that example, you would have to employ labor to make use out of that wealth, would you not? I mean, it's only
So,
wealth if we can make use out of it.
no,
And
the thing,
you can't make use out of it without human labor.
breathing requires labor. Then,
Yeah, that's a form of labor, I would say
okay,
so.
all right, yeah. Well, if we're going to go that far, then that's fine. Every single thing that is wealth requires labor. Breathing, yes, requires human labor. Okay, yeah. Uh, does that mean that breathing somehow, you know, gives you some extra privileges or something? I don't know. I don't even know where to go with that. Um,
Well, I
the
mean, I don't know like what you're referring to. I mean, like so in the context of what human labor is talking about. If you're talking about human labor, it's basically things that human beings do. So if you're doing something, then engaging in labor. Like it's impossible not to engage in labor. Even by sitting in this chair, I'm engaging in labor.
Okay, well, let's just Kenji says mentions the term zero sum game. All right,
Mhm.
so would you say that wealth is a zero sum game?
What do you mean by zero sum game?
That in order for me to become more wealthy, someone else has to become less wealthy.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, so if we go through some exchange and I end up having, um, well, I end up having a lot more wealth than those people who are around me
Mhm.
because I've made a lot of exchanges with a lot of different people satisfying their particular individual needs, um, but each one of them has only satisfied one person in these trades, myself. Um, then this wealth disparity exists, but everybody is still better off. I mean,
I think there
see what
has
I'm
to be.
saying?
I think it has to be put in context. I'm talking about wealth disparity in the context of that. If you get richer, you deprive someone else. I'm talking about that in the context of the current model. I'm talking about that in the context of the way the political economy distributes things and the way the
Oh,
capitalist political
okay,
economy distributes things. I'm not talking
okay.
about that in general. Sure, you can get wealthier without having to deprive someone else. That's definitely true. But it's not true within the context of how things are distributed. Well, it is true, but it depends on how things are distributed. So if you're
Well, you
talking
can
about
certainly screw
marketing,
the system. I mean, the way it is now, absolutely, you can game the system and basically steal your way to the top, so to speak, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean that's the case with any system. You could steal your way to the top in any system, but like so, what I'm saying is, um, the context I'm talking about is the context of economic distribution. In the capitalist mode of distribution, the way people get richer is
Uh,
by accumulating massive amounts of wealth for
well,
themselves.
no, 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 no.
And that happens through.
Wait. We have to clarify that because that's not that doesn't connect. Okay, you can't say that people get wealthy by being wealthy.
I didn't say that. I
Okay,
was going to
you
go
said
on to
that they
describe
accumulate.
how you participate in the market system and the production distribution system in order to get wealthy in the capitalist society.
Okay, that would be the definition for wealth. Becoming wealthy in any system. It doesn't matter what the system is. You've
No, I'm talking
accumulated,
about the context of a capitalist society.
right? but it's applicable across the board. It doesn't have to be a capitalist society.
I'm not saying
If
that it
I,
has to be a capitalist society in order to have production, distribution, and wealth. I'm not saying that. I'm just describing to you to illustrate my point how
okay,
one becomes wealthy in a capitalist society, because that's where my point stands. My point
okay,
stands in the fact that to become wealthy in a capitalist society is to do certain things. So
which are
capitalist society is based on market exchanges and private property relations. I
right,
think we can agree on that. Okay, so what happens in a market exchange is people say, all right, so the way we're going to distribute things is you have to give the person that you're, getting a commodity from another commodity in order to get that commodity. And also in a capitalist society, the way that production is organized is by the people who have ownership rights to the means of production, not necessarily the people who use that means of production. Okay, and the way that their wealth is distributed is the people who own production. They take the product of the people's labor who use production but don't own it, the workers. They take that and then they give a certain amount of it to themselves and a certain amount to the workers.
right, right, right. Okay,
So
so
the way you become wealthy in a society like that is you deprive other people, because what you're doing in that society by engaging in market exchanges is gaining for yourself and then taking away from other people. The way
okay,
you gain in the private property relation is gaining control of production for yourself and taking away from other people. Gaining those people's the product of their labor, taking it for yourself and depriving them of control over it.
I see. Um, I'm going to just have to disagree with you, and we can get to that maybe in another show because we are coming close to the end of the show,
Right, right.
and it's a fairly broad topic that we're going to have to get to. But as a general concept, you're basically saying that wealth disparity does not in itself mean that anything in particular has gone wrong.
I wouldn't say so.
Okay, and when it comes to the idea that you're going to prohibit people from doing things like creating a capitalist society, capitalist system, or doing their capitalist things, you're saying that that's actually not what the NCOMs are proposing, that they're not going to prohibit it. It's just that they're going to provide alternatives that are more attractive. Is that also something that you would say?
Um, to a certain extent, yes, but the capitalist relations that we view to be coercive, I don't think we would allow.
Okay. Um, so let's just, for the sake of argument, say I've got this, you know, island that I'm living on. It's been my island. My family, we've grown. My family and my tribe or whatever have grown this island into whatever sort of paradise that is that we like. In fact, we've got a group of several families where we're all working together. We're all doing the capitalist thing.
Mm-hmm.
We all like it.
Mm-hmm.
Anarcho-communist world exists out there, and it turns out that we run into each other and say, "Hey, how's it going? Oh, wow!" And so we end up meeting. In the anarcho-capitalist position is, "Hey, would you like to trade?" In the anarcho-communist position is what?
Okay. The anarcho-communist position is, all right, well, if people are happy doing what you're doing and they have a way out of that relationship, basically they have equality of opportunity. They can, the relationship is based on what's called consensus democracy. So we're not violating the consent of other people. If you're doing that, we don't give a shit. But if you're violating
Okay.
the consent of other people, then we do give a shit.
That sounds like the anarcho-capitalist position to me.
I think to some extent it is, but I think to some extent it isn't.
Okay, just to make sure that I try to summarize the anarcho-capitalist position is that we believe that capitalism, if offered as a voluntary interaction and accepted as a voluntary interaction, not a decision that is based upon a fear of starvation or your children starving or whatever, but an actual choice
Mm-hmm.
amongst many. If this capitalist option exists and people choose to take advantage of it and find that they benefit from it and they appreciate it and they desire it,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're quote unquote sacrificing the fruits of their labor to the capitalist,
Mm-hmm.
um, that is their choice because maybe they find that they are rewarded greater.
I think it's their choice as well. I would agree that people should be able to do what they want. Obviously, I just outlined that. But
Right.
what I'm going to say right now is that there are certain conceptions of in anarcho-capitalist philosophy of self-ownership. So the idea that you should be able to
It's a,
do whatever.
yeah, it's a bad concept to try to explain and discuss.
Well,
The fact is that
I think it's valuable, at least in the context of this discussion. So what's going on within that philosophical framework, obviously, as you know, is the idea that someone should be able to do whatever they want with their own body, and that they are the owners of their own body. And that,
well,
so, in the
sorry,
context,
repeat that. You broke up there for a second.
oh, sorry. So, if you're talking about the context of self-ownership in anarcho-capitalist philosophy means that I am the owner of myself, and that means I have rights of full control over myself. Am I
Okay,
incorrect?
yeah, but within the limits that you don't exert control over anyone
Well,
else.
right, yeah, but that would conflict with the principle that other people also have that self-ownership.
Okay, sure.
So, in the context of self-ownership, that means that I would be able to do something like sell myself to a person and then transfer my ownership to that person, right?
No,
If I no,
no, it's physically impossible.
why wouldn't that? Why would that be physically impossible?
As long as you exist as a sentient, capable person, person capable of making decisions, they can't make the decisions about how your body works.
Well, I understand that, but self-ownership is a concept that's reduced to rights. It's a concept that's reduced to social conventions. It's not necessarily, oh, well, I can make decisions for myself. The concept is that people should be able to control their body however they see fit, and themselves however they see fit.
And if they sell their body, they have to cease the ability to be able to control their body.
Yes, but it's still included in the concept, because if I have full control over my body and full control over myself, that means that I should be able to transfer that ownership.
Oh, sure. Okay. But let me clarify that. In order for such an action to actually occur, in order for it to be possible for you to sell your body, you have to be able to end and prevent yourself from asserting control over your body.
What do you mean? Yeah. All right. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, that's the point I'm actually getting to, though.
If you actually kill yourself and you sell your body, why not? I mean, is that somehow against the rules?
I wouldn't say that's against the rules, but what I would say was against the rules, and what I wouldn't say is ethically justified and should be allowed, is in the context of that philosophy, in the context of self-ownership, that means you get to do whatever the hell you want with your own body, as long as it doesn't harm other people. So if you voluntarily say, I'm going to sell my body to you and give you full control over my body, that means that you now have rights of control over my body, and that means that I don't have to be able to opt out of that after I voluntarily drawn up the contract that says,
but that's not possible.
Why is that not possible?
Because if you have the ability to control your body, because you've got the ability to make decisions, if you have that ability.
This is not a conversation, and the philosophical concepts do not reduce down to what you like physically are able to do. It's a concept of social rights, social convention.
Okay, let me just give you an example of someone selling their body. And you tell me if it is somehow not acceptable to you.
Okay.
All right. I find out that I've got some sort of terminal disease. I don't really care for the idea of going through the suffering that I'm going to go through. Right. I contact a group that is going to do research on the disease, and I say to them, hey, you know what? I'll give you my body in order to further your research. I would like for you to make sure that my children are cared for their college and so on. So, you pay for their college for all three of my children through med school, and I will give you my body, and I will give it to you in a live state right now. And they'll say, well, when we hook you up to these machines, you'll cease to be, you'll no longer be conscious. You'll be incapable of making any further decisions. Your body will essentially be dead. Even though your heart will be pumping, you'll be brain dead. Is this A legitimate
I
sale?
think under certain conditions it is. Under the condition that they are able to opt out of that agreement at any time.
Well, they no longer exist in this case.
No, I'm talking about pre-death. So what's possible in the context of
Oh, I see. I see. Oh, sure, sure. I mean, if if you make a negotiation with somebody and the person says, all right, well, let's go ahead and do these things, and then one person opts out, the repercussions are that insurance companies, cover the loss that the other person has borne,
right,
or
right. So what I'm saying is under the conditions that people are able to opt out of that relationship at any time before, it becomes impossible and they're dead or whatever. Under that condition, that's perfectly okay with me. And that's
okay,
perfectly okay with any other anarcho-communist given their anti-authoritarian viewpoints.
right, okay. So I mean, the
But
thing is that when
the thing
people
is, though,
use
that I'm trying to highlight is that under the context of self-ownership,
yeah.
in the context of where I'm able, under self-ownership, to transfer ownership of myself to another person, and thus they have full rights of control over me, that means that they can control me and keep me from opting out of the relationship.
Right, and again, this is where the fact that you still have the ability to control you makes the sale void.
But
There
that's
is
not that's taking it out of the context though. The context that we're talking about in the sense of self ownership and where the philosophy stems from is a discussion and claims about social relations. So what people should have the right to do in a society. What people should have the right to do when it comes to relations between other people, not what people physically can do. So I may be able to physically, stab you in the heart or something ridiculous like that.
right.
But we say, as an ethical society, no, we don't want you to be able to do that in the context of
Right,
social.
right.
So we're going to prohibit you for doing that and
Well,
make the
let's just
for doing that.
let's just basically agree that we
But
kind of
that's the
agree.
context that I'm talking about.
Right,
I'm not talking about in the context of what I can physically do. I'm talking about
yeah,
the context of social rights.
right. Okay. Well, the claim is, let's say if I sell myself into slavery and then I choose to opt out of it. Well, the fact is that yeah, in it is not possible to enforce that contract, and therefore
The
that
context of
contract.
social rights, it definitely is though.
Right.
In
Um,
the context that we're talking about, social rights, so what you're able to do given, social laws like we were talking about before, social rules. That's definitely possible. I mean, slavery has existed before, right?
yes,
Obviously.
yes. Slavery
So that's what
has
I'm talking about
existed
the
before.
context. I'm talking about that in that context.
Okay. In the context of slavery, is it possible? Yeah. Okay. All right. I would say that the anarcho-capitalist position on that is one that basically says, um, number one, as long as you have the ability to dissent and say I no longer accept the terms of this contract,
Mm.
um, gives you the option to go to arbitration within a society, and there's a variety of remedies that occur because of that.
Okay.
And it basically kind of works out to something similar to what you would expect from an
I
anarcho-communist society, which is one that the social prevalence, the norm within the society, the what is it called, consensus, would rule the day, and the consensus is that no, when somebody's implicitly has an agreement with you, but explicitly disagrees with that contract, the explicit goes, not the
right.
implicit. Right. So, in any case, unfortunately, we did run out of time. In fact, we've gone over a fair bit. I do
Right.
want to thank you again for joining me, Mr.
No
Tompkins.
problem. No problem.
Just if anybody would like to check out your information, I would refer them to go to YouTube.com and then pull up the channel Red and Black Revolutionary, all one word,
Right.
and take a look at that. And what Facebook pages should they check out?
I've linked all my relevant Facebook stuff in on my channel, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so if you go to the YouTube channel, then you can find the links to the Facebook stuff. So if you'd
Right.
like to check out more of Jake Thompson, please visit that site and check it out. Again, thank you for joining us. This has been the Anarchist Experience. You have a wonderful day.
You too.